Welcome, folks. We'll just give it another minute or so for people to join, and then we'll get started soon. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NNNCo's IoT for Smart Cities webinar. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you on board, and we look forward to presenting. We have a variety of speakers lined up for you for the next hour this afternoon. Let's just do some housekeeping first. Can I ask you to place a note in the right chat box or to the right of your screen if you're having any audio or video issues? At this point, you should be hearing me. You should see the presentation slide deck on your screen. You can probably see me too. And just pop it there into the little chat box, and hopefully we can help you get started if there are any issues on your end. Secondly, we will have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. So as we go through, please insert any questions that pop into your mind along the way, put them into the chat box, the question section, you'll see that there to the right of your screen, and we'll collect those as we go, and we'll address those in the Q&A segment at the end of today's webinar. So we've got a few people on board. So look, without further ado, let's get the show on the road, and I'll introduce you to today's speakers. So today, for the next hour, we're going to be hearing from Rob Zagarella from NNNCo. We've got our guest speaker, Ian Hatton from Complete Urban. We've got Tony Tilbrook, CTO from NNNCo, and you've got myself, Helen Springer. I'm from NNNCo as well. So I'd like to hand you over to Rob Zagarella first. Rob's our CEO here at NNNCo. Rob's also a LoRaWAN Global Ambassador. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Helen, and welcome everybody. Really excited to be here today. Thanks so much for dedicating an hour out of your busy schedules, and I really hope that everyone on the eastern states of Australia is coping well with the weather conditions and the floods completely, particularly in Queensland. So in terms of NNNCo, just a couple of sort of, I guess, key points that I wanted to mention here today. And one is that, we are the leading LoRaWAN network operator here in Australia. We started this business back in 2015, and we really built this business to scale. And we built it particularly initially to be really aligned with the movement around low power wide area networks and IoT, particularly with cities around the world. We do have a carrier license, a telco carrier grade license, and I think that really is fundamental to the way we go about deploying these networks and services. And we think that that has really been a key part of how we've been able to scale our services and to help particularly cities scale the way that they leverage IoT networks. Particularly having that license allows obviously our customers and ourselves to legally be able to provide a shared infrastructure, which really opens up the ecosystem of offerings and solutions and the types of end users for these networks. we're really seeing the market maturing now, particularly in terms of cities sort of moving from sort of testing and trialing different technologies over the years to now really moving into scaled deployments and the focus on, you know, ROI and the real benefits for cities and economies. And we'll be hearing a lot more across this theme throughout the presentations, particularly with Ian and Tony. And, you know, one of the things also that I think is really important here is that the core technology that we've chosen around LoRaWAN, and just seeing the adoption of LoRaWAN over the years has just been quite astounding. We have quite a large commitment to the Alliance. We're a contributing member, and we've seen it grow, you know, pretty much from zero to, you know, over 150 network operators deploying LoRaWAN. There's over 150 million devices now deployed around the world, with a forecasted growth of 500 million, and which is really exciting. And we're also seeing that sort of move to aligning these use cases and benefits to the SDG Sustainable Development Goals around the world, and that's something that we're really passionate about at NNNCo. Next slide, Helen, thanks. Great. So we are, I guess we've also been recognized in the industry in the various awards for the work that we've done in telecommunication networks, particularly for IoT. The ACOMS Awards in 2021 was a case in point, which is the sort of, I guess, preeminent Australian communication award ceremony. And we won that award because of part of the network build that we've done, and one of the network products that Tony will be talking about further in the presentation, called the Nimble. And if you look at some of our major council and city partners, you know, these are councils and city partners who have invested and really adopted IoT as a core infrastructure across their whole city. Some of you may be aware of the City of Gold Coast. We've got Ian Hatton talking next, who was really the, I guess, the visionary and leader around that whole process. Second largest council in Australia. City of Newcastle and the close tie-in with utilities such as Hunter Water. Lake Macquarie City Council, Livingston up in Queensland, and of course in Tasmania through our partnership with Tas Networks across the whole state of Tasmania. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for that. So look, there's some key points there that it'd be great for us to note from what Rob said. LoRaWAN IoT is purpose-built for smart cities, and we're seeing that councils are now thinking and planning about IoT at scale. Thirdly, licensed telecommunication carriers, they can support your journey and help monetize those assets. Now I'd like to move on to passing you to Ian Hatton. Ian has a hands-on experience of designing and delivering IoT at scale. He's currently advising councils about how to generate measurable benefits from IoT investments. He's also the principal of Smart City Advisory from Complete Urban. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everybody. I'm going to present two things today. Now, there's a lot of different factors in designing and building and operating an IoT network, but the critical challenge that I think most councils are dealing with, if I reflect back to the opening comments, the experimental phase of IoT is probably now nearing an end. And what I'm seeing with some of our clients and just discussing with people in the industry generally is there is now a sort of a question mark hanging over, well, what does return on investment look like for us, and how do we realize that? So I'm going to talk about how to identify ROI, how to quantify ROI, and then some different ways of delivering IoT projects, including some thoughts, including a couple of fairly radical ideas about how you can fund the projects. So if you could just go to the first slide, please, Helen. So just a quick background, Complete Urban has been going for about 20 years. Historically, it's a civil engineering, urban design, landscape architecture company, focusing almost exclusively on public assets, so libraries, swimming pools, parks, streetscape. et cetera, et cetera. And it's a group of companies that range from the advisory work that we do and engineering design and full construction documents through to manufacturing and supply of smart infrastructure. So we have partner companies that can help us deliver, but primarily our part of the group of companies does design work. So it was a natural fit to create a smart city advisory line in the business because, as we know, when you're designing a building, public realm, parks, et cetera, IoT, telecommunications, electrical networks, and the various smart city aspects need to be designed in early. So that's really where we put our focus. We're probably a bit less on the sort of cloud and data and that kind of part of the IoT environment, and we partner with other companies to do that. But what we do specialize in is value creation and ROI. So just moving on, please. This is a variation of a slide I've used lots of times. I think most people who have anything to do with smart city have a version of this, but I think it's really important when designing and implementing IoT to be clear about the relationship between those different components. I think most people would understand the difference between a device and a network and the information it gives you. But the critical thing, which is really the central point of this discussion today, is how do you create value? And one of the things that we learned when we first started embarking on this on the Gold Coast was most start points for IoT are about accumulating as much data as possible. And that makes perfect sense. The more data should equal more value. But if you're running a large IoT network, those devices are potentially sending more data than is actually required to solve the use case, which means battery life on devices gets compromised. In terms of your network, you really need to design and operate something that supports that minimum data flow, because it forces you to decide what data is important and then calibrate your architecture and other things accordingly. When you receive that data, the last thing you want to do is spend loads of time and resource filtering through it. So the data really needs to be purpose built. And then the fourth box, the value component, should flow from that. But the critical thing, and I'll give a couple of examples later in the presentation about generating ROI, is what it usually means, and where IoT gets complex but valuable, is you quite often have to change the way you do business. So getting a graph that says, we now know that something happens when something else happens is fundamentally useful. But if you're not acting on it, you're not generating value. And the challenge then is it becomes difficult to build an ROI equation for decision makers and funders to say, the more devices we put out, the more we increase costs potentially, and the ROI is unclear because it tells us something that's interesting as opposed to something that improves our business. So I think it really, really important part of designing and operating IoT is to really focus on these things as early as possible and be really honest with yourselves about what value actually can be extracted, what that means for the business. Does the business actually have an appetite to react positively to the data that gets provided? And I think if you take that as almost like the start point for designing an IoT network, you should be able to generate genuine value and focus on the things that are really important to the business. Next slide, please, Helen. So this is really just a dump of different conversations I've had with people over the last probably 4 or 5 years. So if you start within a council, you'll find that depending on the department, there'll be a different view of what's important. So I used to work with the economic development team, technology teams, land use planners, water utility operators, et cetera, and each of them has a different interpretation of what value looks like, which is absolutely appropriate. If you look across different councils and water utilities, energy utilities, and any other agency, even into manufacturing, organizations that use IoT effectively generally have worked through this kind of mapping to work out what ROI means to them. So again, similar to working out what the component parts of your IoT system might be, you need to be very clear about what kind of ROI you're aiming for. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples, but I think it's important to be very clear that deploying IoT generally at a start point will increase your cost of production because you've got existing systems onto which you're going to add a device and a network in a back end. So you're probably going to pay a monthly fee per device, and you're probably going to have to develop some new skills. So you're instantly incurring a cost. Therefore, you have to do something more, better, cheaper, faster, or whatever, as is shown in those bubbles. Now, it doesn't mean to say that everything you do has to generate savings and efficiencies, because it may well be that if you take the case of environmental sensing, if you can do comparative analysis across green space, urban areas, areas with awnings, areas with trees, areas without shade, areas with prevailing breeze, coastal versus inland, you can start to build up some typologies, and you can inform planning schemes, urban design criteria. And again, that's something we discuss quite a lot with our urban designers as to what kind of data would be useful when you're designing public realm or public space. The same is true, some of our other master plan work is on council depots. So if you've got IoT and in-vehicle management system information about where do trucks go, what are the predominant routes, how do they conflict with pedestrians, can you reduce time to wash down facilities or something like that. Again, you're using the IoT data to make the work site more safe, to reduce lost time, to do spares management, etc., etc., etc. So it really comes down to the use case. And to give you a couple of examples that are kind of polar opposites, really, the biggest use case that we developed at the City of Gold Coast was for smart water metering. Now, most people have heard of smart water meters, and there are various benefits that result from those. Now, when we got involved initially, there was no LoRaWAN network on the Gold Coast, and the water professionals had been looking at smart meters as an alternative to manually collecting the information from meters to put people's bills together. And the payback period was measured in decades, probably 3 decades, to recover the cost of the deployment. And as we know, the battery life is 10, 12 years. So it's very hard to make the project stack up. When we engaged with the business and started talking to them about, well, what kind of return would be good if you stop worrying about the cost of deployment and you think about what you might achieve, it turned out that the biggest issue was water leaks in the network. So people only find out about a water leak when they get their bill, which is significantly larger than normal. There's a council policy that if you repair it within a fixed period of time, council will reimburse a significant chunk of the cost of the repair. So that was costing millions of dollars a year. So by deploying smart water meters on the 3,000 largest consumers in the city, it saved council over $1 million a year in rebates, and the customer experience was improved, potable water loss was reduced, et cetera, et cetera. So the ROI was really around environmental and financial requirements, as opposed to simply making billing cheaper. And the other benefit, obviously, is billing is more accurate and can, in the future, people could have dynamic billing where they could choose to pay daily, weekly, monthly, any period of time that suits them. At the other end, we looked at smart bins, and this one was probably less successful. The business case stacked up, but the complexity of changing vehicle routes and aligning that with all of the route management, the fleet management, the systems that were required to be changed by the people who go around and empty the bins, of which there are about 3,000 on the Gold Coast that are managed in-house, which are in parks and public spaces, just didn't get the support internally. And I think on reflection, what we didn't do as well as we might have done is to engage with that part of the business to understand what their ROI should have been. We assumed it was an efficiency because you'd have less truck rolls, or you can service some bins more than others. But from a personal experience, the water one was, albeit it was a financial outcome, was hugely successful because of the engagement with the business to define the ROI. The bins sensing, less important because the engagement wasn't as effective. So if we just move on. So in terms of considering how to achieve ROI, if we assume good engagement with the operational department, and our experience was that the operational departments need to lead the project, and the smart city team, or digital city team as we were called, was technical support in a large respect, and a kind of a critical friend. But the first lesson is you really need to solve a problem or make an improvement. If it's a kind of a novelty project, I'm not saying you shouldn't do them, but I think your ROI is going to be quite different. It's going to be based around people understanding a bit better how the system might work. But I think in terms of public value and what ratepayers might reasonably expect from a council, I think it's experimental rather than valuable. Create value through scale is something I genuinely believe in. Now, I don't think scale means every council has to do 10,000 devices over a network. But it does mean if you've got 500 bins in the public realm and you want to do a smart waste management strategy, you probably ought to aim to put all of the bins into the smart environment. So scale is about the totality of the service area adopting and using the IoT methodologies to extract value. If you just do it on 10%, because you've got a network deployment cost and all those other things we talked about, I think it limits the opportunity to generate ROI. And again, that ROI could just be about the bins not smelling or something like that. But it's very difficult to realize that benefit if you're not working across the whole portfolio. Interoperability, anyone who works in Smart City hears this all the time, but again, I think too often it gets missed as a genuine issue. So if I go back to the blogs, if you're generating data to try to make a difference, if you've got 3 or 4 networks running for different use cases, you're increasing your costs, so that the ROI is probably going to be affected in some way. Now, that's not to say you can't have more than one network, and certainly at the Gold Coast, we had a 3-tier network with LoRaWAN for the the high volume remote small data packet IoT, Wi-Fi and cellular for things like remote CCTV cameras and other things, and then a fiber network. So I think there is a need to think about that. But in terms of a kind of a high numbers, high volume IoT network, you really need to have most things running over a network into a back end if you can, and then you can aggregate that out to other people as you choose. And really central to that, the network choice. So for the Gold Coast, we looked at, I can't even remember how many, but a lot of different network options. And it really became apparent that with IoT, successful IoT projects, that one of the success factors is to reduce the data consumption to a minimum to solve the problem. If you can do that across multiple use cases, you don't need a network that's got high throughput. You just need a network that can minimize battery consumption, minimize data throughput, but give you all of the information you need. So engineering through a network is quite an interesting challenge, which helps drive value and ROI. And it's also, for me, it wasn't just about the cheapest possible option to put as many devices as possible out. As I say, that value and ROI forced us as a team and all of our internal external partners to seriously consider what data was actually required to generate value. So it wasn't just, we can gather as much data as we want and then we'll try and work it out later. We had to design in ROI and value at the beginning to make the network cost effective. And then iterative approaches. Again, I've seen a lot of trials, and my observation is too many of them are trials without an objective. So generally you would you'd test drive a new car because you're thinking of buying one. I don't spend much of my weekends going around just trying out cars without the intention of buying them. I've got other things to do, and I'm sure other people have. So I think there's a bit of a sort of a focus, an opportunity to focus more on iterative approaches, that the trial leads to a larger trial, leads to that scale deployment I was talking about to get the ROI. Now, if the ROI is defined up front, it can change. That's part of the iteration, but the project needs to be constantly challenging itself to try to realize that ROI objective that it was intended to. And I think the last slide, Helen. So the critical thing, I think, for many councils is funding IoT. There is no doubt generally that the early stages of IoT incur an additional cost. Now, depending on what your ROI is, that might be acceptable. It might be that more information is available to transport planners or to the public, or whoever the end user is, or for your open data project. So given the complexity of ROI, funding is equally complex. So are you saying that you're happy to increase the cost of production because there's some other benefit? Well, in that case, the IoT has to be embedded into the service delivery, because the service planning and the budget cycles need to reflect the investment in IoT, and that needs to become core funding. If the service department starts to rely on an IoT system and the data it provides, but there isn't a kind of a core funding component that's embedded in the service planning model, then it becomes vulnerable, and that can compromise service delivery down the track. Similarly, when doing forward forecasts, maybe look at the sort of expanded investment in IoT. As I was saying earlier, IoT at scale generally gives a better ROI. So if you're going to work across multiple use cases, I would be engaging around the business and with corporate finance guys to say, well, we've got 5 or 6 operational areas that could benefit from running IoT systems, running over a single network or using a single backend or whatever it is. Therefore, in parallel, different parts of the organization need to be putting in some budget. And I think if it's dispersed across the organization, it gives it a really good chance of success, because people can attribute a marginal increase in cost with a benefit. And it may well be down the track that one of the core objectives is to then try and make it break even. And again, looking at the Gold Coast model, we basically had a foundation anchor project, which was the water meters, which generated by, well, probably within the first year of operation, covered all of the prior costs that went into developing and installing and making workable the network. So that for us was critically important, because for political reasons, that just carries really well from a smart city perspective, that yes, we had to invest money for 2 to 3 years, but when it went live, it started covering its own cost. And in the case of the water use case, more than that. Also, I see a lot of councils relying on grants. That's absolutely business as usual, but it doesn't matter if it's a sports centre or a swimming pool or a park or millions of other things, transport solutions. Grants are a central part of the operating model. What I've seen work much better is when those grants are combined with other funds from council, and it really comes back to the first 2 points of, once it's up and running, assuming success, you really want to keep it running. So in getting the grant, combining the grant with other funding discussions internally is quite a useful way of reducing the upfront cost and making sure that the whole project can continue. Joint funding between agencies is hard, there's no doubt about it, but I think if somebody owns and funds the network, somebody else can potentially pay to use it, or you can share data. A lot of discussion at the moment in the lead up to the Olympics around data sharing and data exchanges and digital twins and things like that. This kind of data from IoT networks is hugely valuable for those. So I think, I'm doing work for one council at the moment where we're trying to design an IoT network that they would allow another agency to use, and they would forward fund all of the CapEx in exchange for a fee down the track. So both organizations get a financial and operational benefit. Bit more complex, but certainly worth thinking about. And then a little bit of controversy. You can use debt. I mean, Treasury borrowing at the moment is, fairly cheap. Corporate finance guys will obviously have their own thoughts on, the appropriateness of that and how it goes into the forward schedules for funding and credit ratings and all those things for council, but it's worth considering. And then the other thing that I've come across over the last probably 2 to 3 years is there seems to be a genuine interest from private investors. So I've been talking to one private investor about what the threshold would be for the number of devices and the kind of monthly fees to give them a rate of return that's consistent with the market. And they seem to be assessing these sorts of investments as very low risk, because it's government. It's like a lot of people who contract into government, you generally get paid. When you enter a contract, it gets honoured, and they can take a whole of life view of the investment. So again, without trying to sort of encourage overly risky behaviour, I think there is potentially the coming of some private investment models that help basically take all the capital pain away from these projects and help councils smooth out that 5-10 year cost of getting all of those benefits and ROI. So with that, I think, Helen, that's me.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. And just a reminder, everyone, Ian's the principal of the Smart City Advisory at Complete Urban. We've got some great data points Ian's left us with. Really, it's about how to zoom out and to look at the city as an enabling economy that is sustainable and delivers value to the public. Also, some good points around how to realise return on your IoT investment and how to fund those investments, most importantly. So I welcome you to our next speaker, Tony Tilbrook. Tony's the Chief Technology Officer here at NNNCo. Tony's also the Chair of the Global Smart Cities Work Group for the LoRa Alliance. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Helen. Appreciate that. Couple of quick little things while we're here. Everybody, if there's any questions that anyone's got, I encourage you to please put those into the chat sequence so that we can make sure that we can answer those as we move forward. Obviously, the content will be available afterwards, and we'll also send you supplementary information if you so wish. So today, what I want to really talk about is go a little bit deeper on a couple of things that some of the previous speakers have done, what Rob mentioned about why LoRaWAN, where that's heading, a little bit about why NNNCo. I want to touch a little bit on the ROI and perhaps the anchor use cases that things are that cities are looking at on a day-to-day basis to understand how they can bring value to their organisations. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into this and get moving. So thanks, Helen. So just the first comment I want to make is around, what LoRaWAN itself, which is the primary technology that NNNCo is involved in delivering to our smart city customers and indeed all of our enterprise customers, is around how suitable is LoRaWAN as a technology. The evidence is now global. There's 166 LoRaWAN network operators globally. These are organisations like NNNCo in Australia, Spark Telecom in New Zealand, Swisscom, KPN, Orange, Comcast in the United States. These are big names, and these organisations are involved in rolling out LoRaWAN for a very, very good reason. And that's primarily because it's the right technology for using in an IoT sense. And so I just wanted to be clear that really LoRaWAN now, it's a global phenomenon. It's the best technology for us to use in terms of the types of IoT use cases that we might be looking at. So thanks, Helen. I'm just going to ask you to move to the next slide. So a few of the reasons that I wanted to specifically highlight on this, and as part of my role as the Smart Cities work group kind of leader, there's people globally coming to us every week and asking us exactly what's going on around smart cities, how they should deploy their cities, who are the influences around IoT and smart city use cases. And what we find now is over and above is that the cities are starting to understand that the LoRaWAN technology itself is actually providing the best, lowest cost deployment, plus in addition, the greatest flexibility that they need to deliver their outcomes. So just a couple of things to really look at here. First of all, there's been a year-on-year growth of 33% in terms of the number of devices growing. We are estimated, based on this year-on-year growth, that we're going to be up to 500 million units deployed by 2025. So this technology is here to stay, and I believe, and it is, the default. The International Telecommunications Union has now made the stipulation that under Y4480, the low power protocol for wide area networks, LoRaWAN is now the default standard. This is an important change in terms of our industry, because what it fundamentally means is that globally we have a total outcome for cities, for enterprises and for communities to be able to use the technology. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this slide because I believe a lot of you have already seen and understood some of the technology. But I do encourage you, when we forward you the slide deck, which will go to each recipient on the registered on the webinar, you will see a link which actually explains how the ITU Standardization Expert Group works and how they actually bring together this community of technology. But I just wanted to talk very briefly about a couple of the really key points from my perspective around what makes LoRaWAN the right technology for your smart city use case. And one of those things is around the low-cost nature of deploying network versus the actual operation of those network. So Ian very correctly, I think, made the point that there are a number of different types of ROI around rolling out a network. And yes, we've got to consider CapEx and we've got to consider the operation of those networks. But I'm going to talk in a minute about how we go a little bit deeper in how we leverage those networks and actually provide those to our constituents, and in this case, enterprise and the citizens involved in our cities. It's a low-cost technology to deploy, providing coverage is something which is not an easy thing to do unless you know how to do it. So NNNCo is beautifully positioned through the LoRaWAN technology that we use to provide you with that kind of coverage that you need. If you now look at I think one of the greatest areas of the technology which makes the LoRaWAN to be a primary consideration for all of your IoT outcomes, and that's the ultra low power nature of the technology. And we range from very high end energy heavy use cases of a couple of years all the way out to many tens of years, up to 15 years for very low uplink use cases. And very importantly, I think that it's a secret sauce really around what's happening with LoRaWAN. The ultra power nature of what we're delivering and what LoRaWAN delivers to you allows you to deliver devices for extended periods of time. What's so important about this is that the hidden cost, not just around the device, but around the deployment, the actual servicing and management and device management moving forward of those devices means that the city then gets to benefit from the fact that they don't have to keep deploying people to go replacing devices into the future. It's an extremely important point, and sometimes it gets missed. There are a myriad of reasons why LoRaWAN has been built from the ground up as a technology suited for this application. And I would encourage us to look more deeply, and I also open up the offer to be able to come back and speak at detail with our team to the cities about what's going to be required and how it can benefit you as a technology, as opposed to just potentially falling to some other default, which you go, oh, this might be easy. Let's have a look at something here which we can work with you, which is easy to deploy, simple, uses your assets, and leverages the benefit that NNNCo brings as part of our technology offering. So thanks, Helen. This slide, what I want to talk about here very briefly is one of the things which happens as part of my my engagement and privilege to be involved on a global level around cities globally, solutions providers, manufacturers, and other enterprise in asking how can we deploy IoT technology as part of a more broader scope. And one of the things which is quite fascinating here is if you look at the bottom part of this slide, you'll see that, you know, no matter where you are, whether you happen to be a regional council or a city council, you've got one of these engagements within your area. You've got agriculture, you've got enterprise, you've got business, you've got the cities themselves and your own use cases, you've got industry, you've got manufacturing going on, you've got tracking and logistics, and you've got, of course, utilities. Cities are in this amazingly special position where the city itself can actually be the anchor, the IoT anchor for the smart economy across a wide variety of use cases and industries. And I find it fascinating when I speak globally and I talk to these organizations globally and the work that we've done here in Australia. I find it fascinating that cities find themselves in a position where people are looking and organizations are looking to them to actually help that process. And we're in a unique position to not only as NNNCo help you do that, but also the city themselves be involved in actually the rollout of network, which then can then be provisioned across a large number of use cases. Thanks, Helen. So this next slide, I just want to really just talk about just a little bit about how NNNCo, in terms of our technology stack, fits into the IoT use case and potentially the city's offering to their constituents, both businesses and the community. And on the left-hand side of this, we lovingly call this the 4 pillars of IoT, and it looks like 5, but there's only 4. And that is on the left-hand side, you've got the devices world, which is where you have an environment where there are a myriad of over literally thousands of different types of LoRaWAN or other types of devices which can sense data in the real world. NNNCo has developed a very specific and precise process around ingesting devices, which can allow us to be able to integrate devices into our LoRaWAN network. And this is very, very important because it means that the city as an organization doesn't have to carry the risk of ingesting devices. They can look to NNNCo to help them through that process. Now, this happens on multiple levels, but it's really NNNCo engaging with manufacturers and the city to make sure that those devices are integrated. The middle section, separated by the dotted line, is around the communications protocol, which is the gateway, which is distributed across the city, and the network core. NNNCo operates the network core, which is actually used by the largest number of global LoRaWAN operators in the world. We provide a highly scalable solution, which allows us to be able to service all of your requirements in terms of both the individual use cases for the city, but also a multi-tenant environment, which enables us to securely and safely service your constituents, both business and citizens, in that same environment. And I want to just highlight the third core, which is the third pillar, which is around, in our view, what's called the data layer. And the reason I think this is important, and our business thinks this is important, is that, to Ian's point previously, you've got an interoperability problem. And that is, how do you bring all of the devices in? How do you consolidate those devices, manage the data, manage the device, manage the communications infrastructure, and put it into a central, evenly managed, harmonized data layer, which allows you, the city, to be able to distribute that across multiple downstream applications. And that's what our platform, which is our service delivery layer, that's what our platform End-to-End DL is all about. It's all about reducing complexity and providing you with an ease of integration moving forward. And then finally, the downstream layer, which is the application layer, is where you interface in your city. And we find it's important for all of the cities that we even work with and our other enterprise customers, that it's important that they understand that it's the cost and complexity of delivering a downstream interface or a connection can be reduced significantly by some form of harmonization around that data layer. And I'm going to get into that just a little bit more deeply in the next slide. Thanks, Helen. Oops. Okay, so something a little bit different there to what I expected, but that's okay. So what I'm going to talk about here is specifically around the NNNCo advantage. And we'll come back to the End-to-End DL slide in just a second. But a couple of things here which I think are really important to note, and Rob alluded to this in his original presentation, and that is around the fact that NNNCo is a licensed telecommunications provider. And in that, we are providing the city and enterprise and consumers a carrier class network. And what does that really mean? And this is a word that is sporadically used from time to time, but the reality of this situation is that a licensed telecommunications provider means that we are under quite specific regulations and requirements to ensure that we deliver a certain type of service and a certain level of service, which we are accountable for on a day-to-day basis. It also means that we have to make sure that we provide certain levels of services which are done at a truly accountable and manageable cost profile. So I think it's important to recognize that operating a licensed telecommunications provider, as far as NNNCo is concerned, is providing you with the service that you need to deliver not only the services that councils require, but also the constituents, the businesses, and the individuals that need to actually get access to their data moving forward. NNNCo is specifically built from the ground up to provide you with that kind of interface. We have highly flexible, looking at the middle of the slide here, we have highly flexible commercial and deployment options to help the city grow with a sustainable network into the long term. And I think that's very, very important. We have a profile of gateways which have been productized, if you like, to the point where the city can choose what's best for their application. We can allow you to build according to your requirement. We've obviously provided a fully managed 24/7 network operations center, which provides you with all of the downstream alerts and alarms that you need to understand what's going on in your environment. We run a highly available, not just a core network, but gateway network, 100% in the core through to our distributed architecture and containerized architecture of platform, but also greater than 99.5% of all gateways across our network, which is exceeding 600 gateways across Australia currently. We run a combined feature of obviously around security. Security is inherent and built into our overall platform and process of operation. And then finally, end-to-end DL, which we're going to touch on just in a second, around how this standardized the integration and the data layer to reduce the cost and deployment of your deployment complexity of your network. Thanks, Helen. If you can go down one, I think, Helen. One more. Thanks very much. So just to slightly reiterate on end-to-end DL. End-to-end DL is our deployment and service delivery platform that we provide a fully scalable and manageable API. Just go back. There we go. Thanks, Helen. A fully scalable and deployable API interface, which provides you with a multi-tenanted, multi-tiered hierarchy. Why is that important? Because within your organization, you're going to have multi-tiered groups. You're going to have, perhaps in the case of Gold Coast, as Ian iterated before, you've got an environment where you've got a lead within the city, but then under that you've got multiple groups. We can help you manage that data flow and therefore manage that particular sets of different organizations within your group. We help by normalizing and harmonizing your data, and we provide you with the ability to provide the interface to any device over any network into end-to-end DL, and then provide you with a downstream push or pull to any downstream application layer that you would provide through our fully documented push or pull API. So thanks, Helen. I'm going to touch very quickly. NNNCo has very specifically worked to provide some standardized network deployments to make these things incredibly easy for you to deploy. We manage the back end, but what we need is interface with our customers so that our customers are deploying network in the right way and the right time that they need. And in this case, it's all about cities. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see that we've got the NNN Now gateway called the Nimble. And really what that is, a little bit secret in there underneath that little box, but in there is a fully deployed NNNCo LoRaWAN gateway with a high gain antenna, which provides you with quite extensive coverage from that single location. Now, the reason we've done that is because we found that we need something which is really easy for people to deploy. This product allows you to go and deploy this, and we've actually won an award around this process. It allows you the ability to deploy network anywhere at any time and actually get an outcome that really is, it's a bit different from spending quite extensive amounts of money on someone to do quite a high cost installation. So I think that the Nimble, we're seeing quite a lot of interest in this, not just locally, but also globally, where we've now sold this as a global product to multiple organizations around the world. We're actually looking at getting close now, I think, to 13 countries around the world. So this is a truly scalable and global product. Obviously, things like the Stellar, which is our indoor gateway, can be also included into some IP67 or 68 enclosures and used in various environments, but it provides you with all of the benefits you need out of an 8-channel gateway. And then, of course, to the station, which is a fully fledged U-Butte, does everything that you need from a LoRaWAN deployment perspective, down from 8 to 16 channels, provides you with flexibility, GPS configuration, geolocation capabilities in some of the other models that we have. It provides you with various antenna capability and installation capability. So if you move on, Helen, thank you. So really just a couple of pictures here around the different types of installment. You see on the right-hand side, one of the variants of the Nimble, which is actually done on a food distribution organisation, on towers, on rooftops, in the areas of Gold Coast water, where we've distributed across large areas of the Gold Coast, in agriculture Victoria, that you can see that. I want to make a little point here. This was raised a little earlier today. I want to raise a little point here about our flexible deployment options. And that's where our customers have the choice for them to deploy or NNNCo to deploy. So we can provide you with a flexible outcome in both circumstances. Thanks, Helen. I'm going to be really quick here because I know we're running out of time, but something which is really proud for NNNCo in very recent times is that we've actually managed to sign up an organisation, a city across the world, which is actually the city of Montevideo in Uruguay. I want to talk just very briefly about the smart street lighting application. This is where we all know each city has their own application environment. That application environment may or may not consist of street lighting. They may have dress lights. They want to manage those street lights in a way that both reduces their use of energy, but also provides them with a bit of flexibility to be able to dim, to be able to fully power their lights or turn their lights off in a really smart and iterative way. We, with our partners, Wellness Tech Group, have now productized and are able to distribute a product which will provide the cities with the ability to provide a network solution and a product solution around the distribution of lighting control across their city. So what this means is the provision of lighting controllers through a NEMA 7 or Zygo interface into the solution over our network, into the luminaire, over our network, into end-to-end DL, which is fully integrated into a platform to provide you with that outcome and provide you with the ability to service your customers. So Helen, if you can move to the next one. And just one example of this, and I just really, the final slide here, and I'll hand back to Helen, but really what this is all about is the city of Montevideo has leveraged NNNCo as a global provider. So it doesn't matter where we are, whether it's in Australia or overseas, the scalability and latencies are such that we can manage these networks in a global sense. The city of Montevideo has selected Wellness Tech Group, our partner, and primarily NNNCo as the network provider to deliver a solution for 70,000 streetlights to cover over 200 square kilometres and 1.3 million people. What's important here is the incredible reduction in carbon, reducing the impact on the environment, and also improving the benefit for the cities in those environments. When you receive the presentation, you'll see a link. I encourage you to have a look at those links, look at the media release, and look at the information provided. One of the things that, last message I want to leave you with very briefly, is that when we talk about an anchor use case, what I'm really getting at is that in this case, for the city of Montevideo, there was an anchor use case. That anchor use case was street lighting. Each city is going to have their own particular anchor use case, which they would like to deliver for the benefit of their own community. It doesn't have to be lighting. It could be waste. It could be people. It could be anything that you want it to be, noise, or whatever the thing is that you need to measure in your environment, which matters for you. And NNNCo can support that and help you scale with that into the future. So thanks, Helen. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. So look, just some key outtakes there that I've just heard. You know, NNNCo is perfectly positioned to be the partner to underpin a city's smart city economy, their strategy. LoRaWAN should be seen as the default standard for cities around the world, LPWAN standard, that is. And it's ideal. Cities have the ability to become the leader, to become the IoT anchor of the smart economy within their location. So we'll move along with the slides, folks. I realise we've got a few minutes left. I've seen we've got one question from James there. We'll get to you soon, James. Thank you. I'd just like to cover off very briefly just a few other use cases. We've heard Tony talk about smart lighting. We've had Ian talk about a few other use cases too. Just some quick ones that NNNCo is currently involved in. Stormwater sewer level monitoring is really big at the moment, especially on the east coast of Australia. Heavy rain at the moment. We've got a data logger device, sits essentially under the manhole lid, has sensors leading from that dangle down into the cavity. They're monitoring the level of the stormwater as it flows. We've got other sensors that hang off that to measure electrical conductivity, or EC. We've got other sensors measuring pH for water quality. And what we'll do is we'll move right along. I'm conscious of time, folks. Environmental monitoring using our same data logger. We've got weather stations we can use in parks and public environment to measure elements such as carbon dioxide, dust, noise, what the temperature is, what the humidity is. We've got rain gauges, we've got rainfall that we can measure as well, whether it's for waste treatment plants or just the main parks and parklands around your location. Also, we have use cases with subwater metering. So we also do actual metering itself, residential and commercial water metering, but sub-metering as well for sports fields and parks and other council-owned facilities. Just allows you to detect or localize water leaks and usage or water consumption at public pools and other toilet facilities and other environments such as that. Another key use case that we're currently involved in is use case asset tracking. Again, small equipment, small hand tools, etc., council-owned assets that may go walking, don't find their way back home, or are genuinely misplaced. We have tracking devices. There are 4 different form factors you can see on the screen. And again, they all speak over the LoRaWAN network. Moving right along, people counting is another big one, whether it's new parkways or walkways that are built or installed or footbridges. It's great to be able to get a people count to validate that it was a good planning choice that's been made, and it's good for reporting back into the business. Usage as well of toilet blocks and facilities, which allow for just-in-time cleaning. Working with councils at the moment, we are to understand how frequently the toilet blocks are used to make sure that the public have a great experience when they go to use it. We've got libraries where we're actually doing people counting to understand who's on site, who's attending, and even what areas of the library are being used, such as at the kids' corner or in other areas that the library may create for the public. And we've got smart building, a little device that sits indoors, again, just taking some general in-building measurements around temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide, which is quite key for health in the workplace, especially in these COVID times. It's good to understand the level of CO2 without getting too much into the medical side of things. These are all contributing factors and metrics that we can use to assess a healthy work environment for our staff and our public. And industrial water solutions. So I touched on manhole and lids, and also touched on sewer and stormwater flow. But you can see there's a whole list there. We can measure the performance of pressure reduction valves. We can do leak detection, hammer transient detection, again, non-revenue water, which is a big thing I know for a lot of councils out there. We can even measure the river and stream and creek levels, groundwater monitoring through the boreholes as well, and even just flooding over public roads, understanding what that looks like in real time so we can inform the people and the public about the environment and what's safe and where to stay away from. So folks, one last thing I'd like to wrap up is what NNNCo is offering is an IoT starter pack, and you can see on your screen there it does come all in one. It's your nimble gateway, which essentially is power over Ethernet if you choose, plug and play. We've got a variety of use cases and devices, IoT devices that would be coupled with that, which are compatible with our network. And then number 3 is our data layer platform and our visualization platform too. So all the data that you are gathering in the field, sending over the network, you've got a browser web-based platform where you can view and work with all of that data with APIs attached with that you can extract into your own environment. That package itself is for a whole year, and that's for $9,995 plus GST. And you'll find more information about that in the pack when we get there. And what I will quickly do, guys, is just touch on that we are on all the key government panels around Australia, if that's of interest to you. I think that's really important from a procurement perspective that we are approved. And what I'd like to do is just jump over to the questions now. Yes, you can see my details on the screen, but James, I can see that you've asked a question. I'll read it out. Does the NNNCo data layer product ingest data that is not from a LoRaWAN device? And if so, what kinds of other devices does it support? Tony, can I hand over to you for that question, please?
Yeah, totally, Helen. Thanks for that. Great question. I didn't actually highlight it in great detail on the 4 pillars slide. There was a little piece underneath that actually showed some other IoT protocols. So in fact, today we are ingesting protocols from and information from non-LoRaWAN devices into the end-to-end DL data layer. We do that via what we call as it's a data proxy, which then takes ingestion from upstream protocols, whether or not it's cellular or Wi-Fi or some other protocols. We normalize and harmonize that and contextualize that data, and then provide that over the same API or a proxy API, which provides to the downstream application. So yes, we can do that. There are some complexity. We need to understand and work with you on that process, but absolutely that's something that we do today, and in fact are doing it with a number of our organisations. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Tony. And look, that's the only questions we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance and your interest this afternoon. Just a reminder that a copy of this presentation will be sent to everyone who did register to attend. So thank you again on behalf of NNNCo and Ian Hatton as well from Complete Urban. I hope you have a good afternoon, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.